I first saw the diary on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the light never really arrives, just shifts between shades of dimness. The archive smelled of paper that had surrendered to time, sweet, brittle, with an undertone of dust and something faintly metallic. I was there on behalf of the university, cataloging estate donations for the history department. Most boxes were filled with the usual: faded photographs, brittle letters, receipts from shops long turned to rubble. The diary was buried at the bottom of a warped wooden crate, bound in cracked black leather. It wasn't the age that made my breath catch, though the year embossed on the spine, 1913, had a quiet gravity. It was the handwriting on the cover page. Even in the uneven strokes of a century-old fountain pen, I knew it instantly. The looping G that dipped too far, the slant that leaned just shy of confidence. It was my handwriting, not just similar, identical. I froze, fingertips still on the page, the muffled patter of rain outside suddenly louder, closer. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Perhaps the shapes of letters weren't so unique after all. Perhaps it was coincidence. But as I turned the first page, my denial began to erode. The ink had faded to brown, the paper gone soft at the edges. Yet every word looked as though my own hand had formed it. The entries began with small details, descriptions of the weather, idle observations of strangers on the street, thoughts about a job at a printing press, ordinary things, until I reached an entry dated February 17th. The words pulled me forward, line by line. I saw him again today. Same coat, same uneven gait. He watched me from the corner as I passed the station, and when I turned, his mouth moved, but the wind swallowed the words. I think he knows what I'm going to do. I read on, feeling an odd tightening in my chest. The tone was unnervingly familiar, like hearing my own voice recorded without remembering when I spoke. The next pages slid deeper into something else. Dreams described in careful, hesitant detail, of streets where the sun never rose, of clocks without hands, of shadows that trailed behind too slowly, and again, references to him, a figure that was both stranger and mirror. I lost track of time in the archive. The storm outside had deepened by the time I reached the midpoint of the diary. My hand shook slightly as I read the entry dated March 3rd. Today I wrote the first page of this book. It will be found. It must be found. If it is you reading this, you already know why. The air in the archive felt heavier, as though the room had shrunk around me. I flipped back to the first page. February entries, then January, then nothing. The March entry sat impossibly out of place in the middle, and yet the paper showed no sign of having been inserted later. A sound broke my focus, a floorboard creaking in the reading room behind me, the kind of creak that carries weight, human weight. I turned sharply, but the aisle was empty, only the slow settling of old wood and shelves. Yet I couldn't shake the certainty that someone had been standing there, close enough to read over my shoulder. When I finally left, the diary came with me. I told myself it was for research, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't leave it in that dim, airless place. In my apartment that night, I set it on the table, its presence a low throb in the room. Rain had followed me home, tapping steadily against the glass. I made tea, trying to ignore it, but my eyes kept pulling toward the book. I began transcribing the entries into my laptop, telling myself that typing them would help me spot inconsistencies, prove it was some elaborate joke or forgery. But as the words accumulated on the screen, a pattern emerged. Dates began to match events from my own life. Not perfectly, but closely enough to make my skin crawl. A description of the flat with peeling green wallpaper mirrored my first apartment. A note about the smell of ozone before the lights failed echoed the night of the citywide blackout last year. By midnight, I reached an entry I hadn't yet read. March 12, 1913. The ink was slightly darker, as if written with a heavier hand. "Tomorrow you will dream of the door. You must not open it." I sat back, pulse in my ears. The words pressed against something deep in my memory, though I couldn't place why. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, and my dreams came in pieces. Shadows moving along a hallway, the hollow click of an unseen latch, a door at the far end that seemed to breathe in the darkness. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The apartment was silent, but a faint smell of damp wood hung in the air, wrong for the dry night outside. The diary lay open on the table, though I was certain I'd closed it before bed. The page waiting for me now was blank, except for a single line at the top. "You did well." My mouth went dry. I didn't touch the book for the rest of the morning, though it seemed to watch me from its place by the window. When I finally forced myself to read further, the entries began to change. They no longer described events of the past, but of the present. My present. The phrasing was exact, capturing things I hadn't told anyone. The chipped mug I favored, the creak in my hallway floor, the way I sometimes paused on the landing to listen to the hum of the building. By late afternoon, I reached the latest entry, dated for tomorrow. I told myself I wouldn't read it, but my hands moved of their own accord, turning the page. "You will see him at the station, standing where the light falls uneven. Do not let him speak first." The station in question could only be the old tram stop near my street. I hadn't been there in months, but the image formed instantly in my mind. The worn yellow paint on the railings, the uneven glow of the single street lamp. The diary sat heavy in my hands, its leather warm, almost alive. Part of me wanted to burn it, end whatever strange loop I had stepped into. But another part, a larger, colder part, wanted to know what would happen if I went. That night, sleep came in fractured shards, full of footsteps that seemed to follow half a beat behind my own, of whispered words I couldn't quite catch. By morning, the air in my apartment felt charged, as if a storm were building just beyond the horizon. The diary lay open again, though I hadn't touched it. The page was waiting for me. "Wear the black coat. Bring the book. It must return." I don't know why I obeyed. Maybe it was inevitability, or maybe I was already too far into the current to swim back. I slipped the diary into my bag, pulled on the coat, and stepped into the pale light of late winter. The streets seemed thinner somehow, stretched, each turn taking slightly longer than it should. By the time I reached the station, the light from the street lamp was already wrong, too sharp, as if cutting through more than just the air. He was there, exactly where the diary had said. He stood under the lamp's fractured glow, the light catching only one side of his face. The other was in shadow, but even in that half view I recognized him in a way that felt deeper than sight. The set of the shoulders, the angle of the head. It was like looking into a mirror that had aged in a different climate. The air between us seemed denser, holding the cold the way water holds depth. My breath clouded, though the night wasn't cold enough for it. I told myself to speak first, just as the diary had warned, but my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. He smiled faintly, and that single gesture felt like a door creaking open in a darkened hall. "You brought it," he said, and his voice was mine, not just in timbre, but in rhythm, in the slight hitch before certain consonants. I clutched the bag tighter. "What is this?" He stepped closer, not hurried, but with the inevitability of a tide. The lamplight flickered, and in that brief dimming, his shadow seemed to stretch farther than it should have, sliding toward me across the wet pavement. "It's not about what it is," he said. "It's about where it belongs, and who." His gaze dropped to the diary as if it were the only thing anchoring him here. "You've read far enough to know it's yours, and mine." I wanted to step back, but my legs locked. The smell of ozone was suddenly strong, metallic on the tongue. How can it be both? He tilted his head, the gesture exactly my own when I'm trying to explain something that can't quite be explained. Because there's no line between us, only the book. The book keeps it together. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. But it can't stay with you forever. I thought of the entries that described my present in perfect detail, the ones that predicted things that hadn't yet happened. If I give it to you, what happens to me? He smiled again, smaller this time. You already know. The street around us seemed quieter than it had a moment ago. No cars, no wind, just the hiss of the lamp's filament. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't heard a single sound from the city since he'd spoken. The silence was so complete it pressed against my eardrums. He reached out a hand, palm up. His skin looked almost translucent under the light, but I could see the faintest trace of ink stains along the side of his hand, the same as mine. Something in me shifted then. I thought of the first time I saw the diary in the archive. The way I'd felt it wasn't just an object, but a tether. I thought of the entries about him, about the warnings I had already obeyed without understanding why. I thought of the blank page that had written to me, and I understood, in a way that wasn't logic, that this moment had been written too. I pulled the diary from my bag. The leather was warm again, almost pulsing with my own heartbeat. I didn't hand it over immediately. What happens if I don't? He lowered his hand slowly. Then you'll keep writing, and it'll keep happening. The words will fill the pages, and the pages will pull you forward until you're standing here, asking me the same question, and you'll give it to me anyway. A pulse of cold ran through me, deeper than bone. I thought of every loop in the handwriting, every ink stroke like a strand of thread connecting past to future, winding tighter. I could feel it now, not time, but a spiral. I placed the book in his hand. The moment his fingers closed around it, the lamplight steadied, the air shifted, and the background hum of the city returned. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere far off. Good, he said quietly, almost to himself. He looked at me one last time, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't read. Pity, maybe, or recognition of something inevitable. Then he turned and walked into the darkness beyond the lamppost, his shape dissolving faster than it should have, as if the night absorbed him. I stood there until the cold began to settle into me in a more ordinary way. My bag felt lighter, but my chest felt heavier. I walked home slowly, every step echoing on the wet pavement. Inside my apartment, I half expected to find the diary waiting for me on the table, but the surface was bare. The air felt flat, emptied of that constant low thrum I hadn't realized I'd grown used to. For the first time in days, I slept through the night. It was a week before I went back to the archive. I told myself I was returning to my normal work, that what had happened was done. But a part of me, quieter now, but still there, was listening for something. On the third day of cataloging, I opened another crate, smaller than the rest. Inside, beneath a folded wool scarf and a stack of brittle letters, was another book. Black leather. The year on the spine, 1914. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared at it, the weight of the silence around it pulling at me in a way I now recognized. I knew, without opening it, that the handwriting inside would be mine. And I knew that somewhere, someone was already waiting under a fractured lamplight for me to bring it back. I closed the crate and slid it to the far end of the table, but I also knew that one day, whether in a week or a year, I would open it, because the loop wasn't a chain around me. It was a path beneath my feet, and I was already walking it.